folks, here's the Kennedy assassination in a nutshell. If you have blind faith and confidence in the federal government of the United States, then you believe the evidence that they present to you. And I'll be the first to admit that it's pretty incriminating against Lee Harvey Oswald. But once you begin to look closer, and if you even have a little bit of distrust about the federal government, and after all, that's the same government that told you there was light at the end of the tunnel in Vietnam, and there's weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, and read my lips, no new taxes, and oh yeah, if you like your health care plan, you'll keep your health care plan. So if you have any doubts about what the government may tell you, and obviously Posner does not, but if you do, then you're going to question what's going on. Briefly, I could refute virtually everything that Posner said, but I'll just start with his description of Dr. Renatus Hertogs, who he goes into great length quoting from some report that Hertog said Oswald was a malcontent and perfectly capable of killing the president, and yada, yada, yada. And yes, he said that, but only after he was briefed and instructed by the federal government and federal officers. If you'll go back and actually read his testimony to the Warren Commission, when they first approached him, he couldn't even remember Lee Harvey Oswald. He couldn't remember him, and then he went and dug up and finally found his report where he said, well, this is a sharp kid. He's just, needs a little structure in his life and everything. And it was only long after the assassination and after the government got through with him that he decided that he was, antisocial and malcontent and certainly capable of killing the president. And then from then on, through the rest of what the government told him, and then what he's telling us today is, and then Oswald killed Officer Tippit, and Oswald did this, and Oswald got his rifle, and Oswald found his palm prints on bookcases there in the depository. Well, yeah, he worked there. And by all accounts, he was moving boxes that morning up on the 6th floor. It would have been really strange if they had not found his fingerprints on boxes up on the 6th floor. I could go on and on. Then he goes into how he killed Tippit. Well, number one, there were at least 3 witnesses, including the assistant manager of the Texas Theater, and Butch Burroughs, a TV evangelist named Jack Davis, and an insurance salesman, all of whom encountered Oswald inside the theater at the time the policeman was being killed. So he was nowhere around. They told about him running into his rooming house. What they didn't tell you was, and what Mrs. Roberts testified to, was that right after Oswald showed up, a police car pulled up out front, and they hit the horn, beep, beep, and then the car pulled down towards Zhang, and here comes Oswald hustling out of his room. And then both of them made mention of the fact that on this bright, warm fall day, no one, not one person, could they find who saw Oswald running or walking from his rooming house to the location of 10th and Patton, all right? Nobody. And how'd he get there? All right, I submit to you he's probably driven there in the police car. And the police car took him to the Texas Theater. And we happen to know that after he dropped Oswald off at the theater, Officer Tippit stopped at the Big Town Record Store across Jefferson and ran in to use the phone because they said he came in, tried to use the phone, couldn't raise anybody, and ran back out, got in his car, drove around, made a right, hit 10th, went up to Patton, and that's where he got killed up there, okay? And we know this because the Dallas Dispatcher tried to raise him on the radio a little after 1, and he didn't answer. That's because he was out of the car. I could go on and on. The pistol that Oswald had, he pulled it in the theater, and it snapped. Officer McDonald, the first one to him, said he grabbed his hand, he shoved the pistol into his stomach, and he heard the gun snap, but it didn't go off. And he remembered thinking, boy, am I lucky it didn't go off. Well, the FBI, buried in the minutia of the Warren report, said they had a bent firing pin or a defective firing pin, and that .38 wouldn't fire, and they had to repair the pistol before it would work. Well, wait a minute. If it wouldn't fire in the theater, how could it have fired and killed Tippit? He didn't kill Tippit, okay? And then there's the whole thing about the shell casings and the different types of shells. Again, if you trust the evidence as presented to you, it seems Oswald's guilty. But let's take a look. All right, slide. Here's all you need to know. You've got fabrication of evidence, suppression of evidence, alteration of evidence, destruction of evidence, intimidation of witnesses. Slide. Fabrication of evidence, slide. All right. On Monday night, Henry Wade at a press conference says, have I mentioned we got his fingerprints on the rifle? Well, that pretty well sealed it for most everyone. Oswald did it, had his fingerprints on the rifle. Except that night, the FBI, quite illegally and with no jurisdiction, because of pressure from Washington through President Johnson and his aide, Cliff Carter, pressured the Dallas police into turning over all of the evidence they had in the assassination to the FBI. And it was shipped up to Washington that night. The next day, in this document signed by J. Edgar Hoover, it says no latent prints of fingerprints were found on the rifle or even the inner parts of the rifle. Slide. On Sunday, Oswald's killed, and that evening the rifle is shipped back to Dallas. We have the documents. On Monday morning in this old Fort Worth Press article, we find an FBI team with a crime lab kit spent a long time in the morgue. Vincent Drain and Harrison, these two FBI agents, carried the rifle over to Miller Funeral Home. Paul Grudy, the funeral home director, told me personally years ago and up to 2 years ago publicly that he was there and saw him, witnessed him, put Oswald's dead hand on the rifle. In fact, they said he had a heck of a time getting that black fingerprint ink off of Oswald's dead hand in time to bury him that afternoon. Fabricated evidence. Slide. Here's Paul Grudy, and he said what I just told you. Slide. Okay, the Dallas Police evidence sheet and the photographs originally showed they had only found 2 spent 6.5 cartridges in the schoolbook depository. But, of course, they wanted to have 3 shots, so a few days later, this third shell casing shows up. And they said that this was carried around in the pocket of a policeman who didn't realize he had really important evidence, so it just suddenly turns up. You notice what the 3 errors are. They said there were these 2 spent cartridges they found plus 1 that was loaded in the rifle. You notice there's a little dent on the shoulder of the cartridge. That was a peculiarity of Oswald's rifle. When you slam the cartridge into the chamber there, it made a little dent on the shoulder of the cartridge. Well, the third shell casing that suddenly showed up and was unaccounted for, it does not have that dent. That was never loaded in the Oswald rifle. This is fabrication of evidence. Slide. Now you've got 2 documents here. They look absolutely the same. FBI reports, same file number, same name, Agent Drain, same date. And one of them that came out in 1968 says that the wrapping paper at the schoolbook depository matched the paper they said Oswald had used as a gun case to smuggle the rifle into the depository. Well, that's incriminating. But oops, over here in 1980, among thousands of FBI documents suddenly dumped out under Freedom of Information Act, we get the exact same looking document, but this says the paper did not match the paper. Well, this is, that shows Oswald might not have gotten the paper from the depository. And when the FBI was asked, well, now, which one of these are correct? He said, well, the one that was released from FBI files in 1980, that's a fake document. Well, how many other fake documents are in FBI files? Slide. Now, the 2 naval technicians, Gerald Custer, who took the autopsy x-rays of President Kennedy, and Floyd Reeby, who took the autopsy photographs of President Kennedy. Not conspiracy theorists, not authors trying to sell a book. These are the technicians that took the photographs and x-rays, and they are on the record saying, and you didn't hear about this because it didn't go very far, the x-rays that the National Archives are now showing us and the photographs are fakes, phonies, not the ones we took. Fabrication of evidence. Slide. Okay, this is where he said there was no damage to the face. The skull shows a whole missing side of the head. Fake photographs, fake. Reeby said they're phony, not the photographs we took. Slide. And this, of course, is what you're expected to believe, that this one bullet comes from 60 feet in the air, strikes Kennedy in the back at the 3rd thoracic vertebra. below the shoulder blade, somehow courses upward without hitting a bone, exits out the front of his throat at an upward trajectory, somehow twists in midair, goes back down to strike Connolly near the right armpit, shatters his fifth rib, exits through his right chest, shatters his wrist bone on his right hand, that dense bone, and then ends up in his left thigh, all by one bullet. Slide. And if that's not zany enough, they said, this is the bullet that did it. How many of y'all fired into a beer can? How many of y'all fired into anything? You know, it distorts bullets. You don't get one like this, all right? Now, here's the proof. This is Governor Connolly's x-ray that was made public. And you can see where the wrist bone, the dense bone, was broken by the bullet and where they repaired it. And you can see the bright spots. There's more pieces of metal that was still in Connolly's body when they buried him than is missing from the bullet they say caused the wound. They're just lying to you, okay? And that little chip up at the top, that's where the FBI chipped off a little piece for spectrographic analysis to analyze the composition of the metal in the bullet, and we still do not have the results of those tests. All we have is a letter from J. Edgar Hoover to the Warren Commission saying, well, the bullet and fragments in the car, they're similar. Similar. That's like saying the woman is just a little bit pregnant, okay? They're either identical, which means they come from the same ammunition, or they're not, which means they came from different ammunition. Again, they're lying to you. Slide. Okay, alteration of evidence. Slide. All right, this gets technical, so I'm just going to go on, but this is, trying to make this quick. This is the sworn deposition of James C. Cadigan, an FBI official. Slide. And in this official testimony, they ask him, do you know why Exhibit 820 was not reprocessed or desilvered? And somebody has scratched out his answer and written, no, this is a latent fingerprint matter, and then it's kind of off the screen over here, but over here they wrote delete. Okay, slide. So sure enough, in the Warren Commission report that you get to read, they say why 820 was not reprocessed or desilvered. He said, no, this is a latent fingerprint deal. Somebody altered an official deposition. This is a criminal act. Slide. So what was he trying to, what did they block out? Well, we find later on that he was saying that he was telling them that the FBI on the 23rd, the day after the assassination, when the FBI was not even officially supposed to be on the case, had taken possession of a very large quantity, all of the evidence. Okay, slide. And we find Chief Curry said, yes, said we got pressure from Washington. They wanted all the evidence in Washington. And Captain Fritz, who was in charge of the investigation, said, well, I need people to identify the gun. I need people to check on this. I need, you know, how can I do this when they're taking away the evidence? He says, but finally we decided as a matter of courtesy to let them have it. And he says, I think that they still have it. And the J. Lee Rankin, the chief counsel of the Warren Commission, says, yes, the commission's still working with it. And Curry says, yeah, we never got any of it back. All right, slide. Meanwhile, on November the 27th, on Tuesday after the Friday assassination, finally there was a meeting with the FBI and the Secret Service and the Dallas Police and the Dallas District Attorney. It was decided to ask the FBI into the case. So 3 days later, finally they become the official investigation, and now there was a few boxes they carried out of the Dallas Police Headquarters. I remember seeing it on local TV, and it became the federal case. What am I telling you? I'm telling you the FBI illegally, surreptitiously, with no chain of evidence, no oversight, had all of the evidence in this case in their hands for 3 full days. Who knows what they put in? Who knows what they took out? This is why the evidence is so confusing. Slide. This is a picture I took myself before they built the 6th floor. You can't get to this window anymore because they've got it plexiglassed off, okay? You can see that's the floor down at the bottom. The window's only a foot away from the floor. The window was only half open. There's 2 2-inch pipes on this side of it. It's going to be very difficult to try to kneel or lay down and aim down the street, and yet you can see through the trees. Let's see if this thing's working here. Well, yeah. See the highway sign? That's where the first shots hit, right there. What's the problem? He was shooting through a tree, live oak tree. It's still there. This is why you can't get in that window. If you could look down and realize that you can't get a line of sight to the middle of the street. But I'll tell you what you can do. Please be careful. But when the light's red and all the traffic stop, run out there right under that sign where the shots hit, turn around, look up at that 6th floor window, and you won't be able to see it because that tree's in the way. And it was in the way then, it's in the way now. That tree's been trimmed back at least 3 times that I know of, two times for TV documentaries and once for the Oliver Stone film. Okay, here's the Dallas Police evidence sheet, the original one. And you can see that they only had 2 spent shells found. You also see at the bottom the paraffin test made on Oswald was positive on both hands, negative on the face. I have a copy of the test. There were traces of nitrates on Oswald's hands, but no nitrates or gunpowder on his face, and no gunpowder on his hands. That's pretty good evidence he had not fired a rifle that day. So now the Warren Commission, when they presented this in their Warren report, what do? They changed it to reveal that there's 3 shell casings found, 3 shots, 3 shell casings, and instead of explaining the paraffin test, they just delete it. They hide it away from you. That's suppression of evidence. All of the Dallas doctors talked about the gaping wound in the right rear portion of Kennedy's head, all of them. And they even showed us this picture, though, before any of the autopsy photographs became known, and they said that was the bullet hole, a little bitty hole in the back of his head, and then, oh, you can see the whole back end of his head looks perfectly okay, but actually kind of looks painted in. And then when the actual photographs autopsies came out, we found out that that wasn't a bullet hole at all. It's just a piece of dried blood or something. Commander Humes, the autopsy doctor, said, I don't know what that is. It could be dry blood. You can see through it. So, again, they're just lying to you. The autopsy clearly states that his wound was at the 3rd thoracic vertebra, but below the shoulder blades to the right of the backbone. And on the evidence, the face sheet of the autopsy, again, we find that, yes, this wound in the back is located in the back, not in the neck. And this is one that's presented by the Warren Commission, and they tried to argue that, well, it's not accurate. That was just a rough sketch. It actually was much higher up on the neck. And yet, we read in the original one, before they deleted it, that it says, verified, Dr. George Berkeley, Kennedy's personal physician, who was there with him in Dallas, who was there at the hospital, who was there at the autopsy. And do you know, was he asked to testify to the Warren Commission? No. Now, here's his jacket, and there's the bullet hole, 3rd thoracic vertebra, middle of the back. And they said, well, yeah, but he was raising his hand, and he was trying to wave, and his coat rode up, and the bullet hole is actually a lot lower than it actually was. Well, here's his shirt, and it also has the bullet hole the exact same location. Your shirt doesn't rise up just because you're waving. Again, they've been lying to you. All right? And, well, all right, we've already done this. Now, here's a good one. Here's the Zapruder film, and this is frame 257, and you can see that this is before the headshot, and you can see what a normal shadow on his head should look like. This is frame 317, and look at this big black blob that's been painted in there. In my new updated version of Crossfire, you'll find there are 11 Hollywood film and tape experts who were shown certain frames from the Zapruder film, and they said unanimously that this is a crudely painted on forgery. That the Zapruder film has been doctored. We now know for sure that it was in the hands of the CIA National Photographic Interpretation Center the day after the assassination and was manipulated before being handed over to Time Life on that Monday. And then, by the way, for all of you old enough to remember, Time Life got it, and we never got to see the film run as a film for 15 years. It was 1975, thanks to the subpoena of Jim Garrison, his prosecution in New Orleans, that we finally got to see the Zapruder film. Now, I threw this one in because I hope you can see this pretty well. This is 314, the headshot. Greer, the driver, is looking right back at Kennedy, contrary to his testimony, which he said he never looked back, didn't even know there was an assassination until Kellerman next to him said, "We're hit, get us out of here." And at that point, the foot comes off the brake lights go off, and the car starts moving forward. You can see here this bright colored object. This is the top of Kellerman's head. There's his forehead, and there's the top of his greased hair. Back then, all us men wore hair grease on our head, and it reflected the sunlight. You can see the same type of reflection off of Greer's, the back of his head, and you can see that Greer's hands are on the wheels. So when you hear this old, weak conspiracy theory about the driver shot him, it's not true. All right, now I'm just quickly, we see all these computer analysis. Here's my computer analysis. Okay, see, went through the tree, hit a sign, bounced back, hit him in the throat. You know, well, don't laugh. The computer did that. Okay? We all know computer in, computer out, garbage in, garbage out, right? Okay, so every computer analysis of the Kennedy assassination has to rely on perfectly accurate data as to the dimensions, depths, trajectories, heights, elevations of Dealey Plaza. And they do this because the Warren Commission hired Dallas County surveyor Robert West and his associate Chester Brenneman. Time Life hired him on Monday after the assassination to survey Dealey Plaza. And then later in April of '64, or May, the Warren Commission hired him to survey Dealey Plaza. And they found all kinds of interesting stuff. They also showed that this is where the first shots hit, and that it was hid behind a tree. You couldn't get a line of sight to the 6th floor. They also found a bullet strike on the south side of Elm Street, and they found these odd yellow marks on the curb, which just happened to straddle the exact place where the headshot was. What's that all about? Okay? But the key thing is that when this map was presented to the Warren Commission, they took it all out, and they altered their frame numbers, which means that no computer analysis based on the Warren Commission numbers can be accurate because they jimmied with the numbers. Then, of course, big deals made out of the picture of Oswald in the backyard. Well, that's him. He did it. There's his rifle. And just like Posner, in February of '64, long before the Warren Commission came out from behind closed doors, they say Lee Oswald with the weapons he used to kill President Kennedy and Officer Tibbet. How's that for innocent until proven guilty? Okay? But now let's look at this picture a little closer. We find, number one, that if you look up close to his head, there's a line that goes right under his chin. And up here it looks pretty much like Oswald, but that chin is big, broad, flat chin. Look at Oswald. He had a little old pointy cleft chin. All right? And he told the Dallas police, he said, well, Chief Fritz said, I showed Oswald a large picture of him holding a rifle, and the picture had been enlarged by the crime lab, and he said the picture was not his, that the face was his face, but that the picture had been superimposed somebody else on his body, okay? Well, wait a minute, is that possible? Okay, if you now we know that they take the two pictures that they said they found of Oswald in the backyard that were supposedly taken by a handheld camera on two different occasions, minutes apart, and if you make them into a transparency, nothing should match. Oh, but wait, Oswald's face matches perfectly on both of them. And the little V-shaped shadow under his nose. Even in one, he's got his head tilted, and over here his head's back this way, but the shadow never moves. This is strong support that Oswald was telling the truth. This is a superimposed picture with his face placed on somebody else's body. And by the way, we now know that there was three pictures. A third photograph ended up in the hands of Geneva White, the policeman's wife that Beverly saw him in Dealey Plaza at the time of the shooting, okay? And he told her, keep this, it'll be worth something. And this other photograph shows a whole different pose. And yet, did they know about this third photograph? Yes, they did, because the Warren Commission, when they had somebody pose as a reproduction, reenactment of the backyard photograph, they posed in the pose of the third photograph that was never explained and never known for 15 years. Suppression of evidence. All right, we all saw on the Zapruder film that Jackie crawls out on the rear deck of the car, picked up his piece of his head. And we know this because Dr. Jenkins talks about how she was shell-shocked and handed him this piece of skull over at Parkland Hospital. And yet for years, you all have been told, well, she was trying to escape the car. Well, she was trying to help Clint Hill climb on. Yada, yada, yada. Why? Because obviously if a piece of his skull was blown to the rear deck of the car, that indicates a shot from the front. There were missing frames from the Zapruder film, 6 frames as he goes behind that Stemmons Freeway sign. You haven't heard about this either, but Japanese television found a version of the Zapruder film that the 6 frames are present. And they had a computer analyzed by both in Poland and in the England. And both of them concurred and said that there was a bullet strike on this sign. So now you got 2 bullets hitting Kennedy, 2 bullets hitting Connolly, a bullet hitting James Tague, a bullet hitting the curb, a bullet by the manhole cover, and now you got a bullet that hit this sign. So, you know, there were bullets flying all over the place, just like Beverly was saying. And again, suppression of evidence. You've got all these people, including Dallas policemen, who encountered men showing Secret Service identification and chasing them away, saying, don't come back here, we got it covered back here, you go on over there, and moving people all around. All right, this was duly reported by the Dallas News. It continues to tell you there was nothing else going on, and yet nobody has explained who these people were with Secret Service identification good enough to fool Dallas policemen. All right, here's what I was talking about. There is the 3rd photograph that suddenly turned up after 15 years of Oswald. And did they know about it? Well, here's the Commission Exhibit 37, and look, they're using the pose not of the 2 known photographs, but of the 3rd suppressed photograph, suppression of evidence. Here is Arlen Specter trying to demonstrate his cockamamie single bullet theory that the bullet went through Kennedy's neck and then just kept on and hit Connolly. But you see, they kind of slipped up because they actually marked the bullet mark on this Kennedy stand-in down in the back, closer to where it actually was. So you see, he's got to move his little straight edge about 6 inches over the guy's shoulder to make this trajectory through 2 men work. They just lied to you. They know better. Now, did they know better? Of course they did. Here's a transcript from the January 27th Warren Commission meeting, and we hear J. Lee Rankin say, well, it seems quite apparent now that since we have a picture of the bullet that went in the back, that bullet that entered the back and didn't hit any bone and came out the shirt in front, and, you know, and then he says, and so how it could turn, and by then he realizes what he's saying. He's saying he was going to say, how could it turn in midair and go back down and strike Connolly? So he realized what he's saying, so he shut up. They knew as early as January of '64 that this single bullet theory didn't work because the back wound's lower than the throat wound. Whoa, wait a minute. Maybe that's a whole new conspiracy theory. That's an upward trajectory, isn't it? Maybe there was a gunman hiding in the trunk of the car. Hey. It makes as much sense as the Secret Service agent in the backup car accidentally slipping and shooting him in the back of the head, you know, and they're seriously telling you that on national television. That didn't happen. People were standing there right there watching. If that had happened, somebody would have said so. Destruction of evidence. Here was the Star Telegram ran a picture of the bullet in the grass near the manhole cover that was the next day. And here we have a Dallas policeman and a deputy sheriff are standing there guarding it. This sandy-haired fella picks it up, sticks it in his pocket, and walks off. Chief Curry published these pictures in his book and said that was an FBI agent. So where did that extraneous bullet go to? Went into the pocket of an FBI agent, and it's never been accounted for or explained. Destruction of evidence. Gerald Posner conveniently blocked off the other portion of this picture, saying this is a picture of the backyard of General Edwin Walker's house that found in Oswald's possessions, and therefore he must have shot at General Walker. Well, wait a minute. When it was actually shown in the Dallas police, here's the Dallas police evidence that they collected from Oswald, and you notice he had a spy camera, Minox camera, that had a 5-digit serial number. Researchers have checked with Minox Corporation, and we found out that only 6-digit serial numbers were commercially available. So Oswald had a spy camera that was not commercially available. Somebody issued it to him. And here, down here, I don't know if you can see this, but here is the photograph of the back of Edwin Walker's house, and there's the car. And look, you could read the license plate if you got up close enough. And yet, while it was in the hands of the federal authorities, somebody poked a hole in the license plate. So you couldn't tell who was there, so you couldn't find out what was actually going on. And while I'm on General Walker, because Posner made a big deal about that, I interviewed General Walker in the fall of 1964, and he said the police told him that the caliber of rifle used to shoot through his window was a 30-06. Well, Oswald was never known to have a 30-06. Walker did not believe that Oswald had taken a shot at him. And he also told me, because this was just a month or two that I interviewed him after the Warren Commission had issued their report, and he said, look, Oswald and Ruby knew each other, just as Beverly told you. He said the whole Warren Commission is going to have to start over just on that one fact alone. That was General Walker. Okay, immediately they began to clean up the car. See the bucket down here? They were washing off the car, washing down the seats. They put the top on, and under orders of Lyndon Johnson, they had the car sent off, torn down, rebuilt, made armor-plated, put bulletproof glass in it, and destroyed it as forensic evidence. Agent Hosty said that Oswald, a week or two before the assassination, gone to FBI headquarters in Dallas and had left a note that was styled as a warning, okay? But after the assassination, J. Gordon Shanklin, the head of the Dallas FBI office, called Hosty in and said, get rid of that note. So he started tearing it up. He said, no, I don't even want it in this office. So he went and flushed it down the drain somewhere. That is blatant destruction of evidence, and I submit to you, ladies and gentlemen, if that note had been some kind of warning, they claimed that he was warning, saying he was going to do something bad to the FBI if they didn't leave his wife alone. Well, if he was threatening the FBI, don't you think they would have published that note on the cover of Life magazine to show what kind of a violent, prone individual he was? But no, instead they destroyed this piece of vital evidence. So, intimidation of witnesses. Look at all these witnesses at the hands of the Warren Commission. Jean Hill, they took her to a windowless room in Parkland Hospital, and Arlen Specter berated her and terrorized her into trying to say what he wanted her to say. And when she balked, he said, well, we can make you look as crazy as Marguerite Oswald, and you know how crazy she is. We can have you locked away. It just goes on and on. Over here is a whole list of people, very critical witnesses, including Beverly Oliver, who wasn't known at that time. Or, I mean, the government knew about her, right? But nobody else did, and so she was never questioned by the Warren Commission. And all of these people ignored by the Warren Commission. And these are people that all had important things to say. Now, is that the way to conduct investigation? Okay, now quickly, there's even questions over who Oswald was or who the Oswald in Dallas was. And if you think that's crazy, here is a warning note from J. Edgar Hoover himself to the Security Division of the State Department, dated 1960, 3 years before the assassination, in which he says, there is a chance of a possibility of an imposter using Lee Harvey Oswald's birth certificate. Please forward any information you may have. So unlike what we were told at the time, which was the government didn't know anything about Oswald, he just kind of slipped between the cracks and nobody paid any attention to him. J. Edgar Hoover personally was aware of Lee Harvey Oswald 3 years before the assassination. And then you get this picture that says this is Oswald about the time he defected to Russia. Well, it's kind of an odd-looking picture. Look, one of his shoulders seems kind of broad, and the other seems kind of knocked down and skinny, and he's heavily shadowed on one side of his face, and then hardly any shadow on the other, and then his right eyebrow and mouth seems to have showed signs of retouching. So let's look at this picture even a little closer. You can see where it seems like it's retouched here and here. And we also see that there's a break in the hairline, and when you connect that all the way down through here and split that, you look like you've got two similar but different individuals. And this was a common tactic to two people who look somewhat similar, and then superimpose their two faces together, and then when they go through passport control or any kind of inspection, if it's cursory, they go, well, yeah, that looks pretty much like them, and they get on through. And now you can see in some of the other photographs, too, you can see the split face, that this one looks different than this one. This one looks different from this one. And here in this one, his Marine picture, along with the Dallas Oswald. And look, this one's, when you match up the eyes, the nose, and the mouth, this one's an inch or two shorter than the guy that went in the Marines. I always thought the Marines built men, not knocked them down 2 inches. In the Marines, he was listed as 5'11". At his autopsy, he was 5'9". Lost 2 inches there somewhere. So, and if that sounds crazy, then consider that J. Edgar Hoover thought there was an imposter using Oswald's identity, and in 1967 his own mother asked for an exhumation of the grave, saying she had questions about the marks and scars on the body. And Paul Grudy, funeral home director, told me that the Secret Service came back to the funeral home about a week or so after the burial and was asking him questions about scars, marks on the body. And one of them finally commented and said, you know, we really don't know who we have in that grave. But you don't get told that, do you? And okay, so we see suppression of evidence, fabrication of evidence, alteration of evidence, destruction of evidence, intimidation of witnesses. These are all criminal acts, and it all occurred at the federal level. And the two men responsible are his successor, Lyndon Baines Johnson, and his next-door neighbor and old buddy, J. Edgar Hoover, who was in sole charge of the investigation. The Warren Commission lamented the fact that they had no investigators and that they were totally dependent on the FBI to give them the evidence. Can you trust the evidence? No. And, by the way, if you want to tell somebody who is guilty in the assassination, I will name the two men who, in a courtroom, could be found guilty in the assassination, and it's Lyndon Johnson and J. Edgar Hoover. Now, can I prove that those two men ordered or orchestrated the assassination? No, I cannot. But what I can prove, beyond any reasonable shadow of a doubt, is that these two men took actions to block, thwart, and stop any kind of meaningful, truthful investigation into the assassination. This makes them accessories. Technically, accessories after the fact. And in Texas, we have executed people who are accessories after the fact. Because legally, even though the facts of the case show they didn't shoot anybody, but they hid the gun, or they drove the car, or they were there, they helped cover it up, and under our legal system, they are considered just as guilty as the person who pulled the trigger. So I have long since lost interest in how many people were shooting at Kennedy and from what location, and how many shots from the grassy knoll, how many shots from the Dow Tech building. These are the guilty parties right here. And it was occurred at the federal level of the United States, and this is what transformed what at that time was merely another Texas homicide into a national coup d'etat. If you don't believe me, listen to Evelyn Lincoln. Everyone know who Evelyn Lincoln was? Just a few hands. How many people have seen an interview with Evelyn Lincoln? You really have? There's hardly been any interviews with Evelyn Lincoln. That was Kennedy's personal secretary. And why haven't we heard from her? Because in this letter from Evelyn Lincoln, she says, as far as the assassination is concerned, it's my belief that there was a conspiracy because there were those who disliked him and thought the only way to get rid of him was to assassinate him. And these conspirators, in my opinion, were Lyndon Johnson, J. Edgar Hoover, the Mafia, the CIA, and the Cubans in Florida. Exactly. Now, John J. McCloy, the powerful banker who sat on the Warren Commission and was one of their most powerful and influential members, said early on, it was of paramount importance that we show the world that America is not a banana republic where a government can be changed by conspiracy. Well, folks, I'm here to tell you the sad truth, which is we are just another banana republic. And our government was changed in 1963 by a conspiracy. Now, I'm always asked, will we ever know the truth about the Kennedy assassination? And I'm here to tell you, you know the truth right now, and you certainly know it after seeing my presentation. The real question, what they're really asking is, will the time come when a federal official will get up at a press conference or in front of the public and go, okay, here's what really happened to Kennedy? No, that's not going to happen. Why? Because if they publicly admit that there was a coup in 1963 and that the government of this country was changed and taken over by a violent act, that makes it an illegitimate government took over. And that means every administration since Lyndon Johnson has been based on an illegitimate government. And the lawyers would have a field day. They would try to roll back every law, every regulation, every presidential order, everything. It would be total chaos, and nobody wants to put up with that. So you'll never hear any truth except out of me, and because I'm stupid enough to tell you the emperor does not have any clothes on.